Well, welcome everybody. I'm so glad to see you. I'm Ann Meyerson, and I am co-chair of the Quincy Tree Alliance. So a couple of years ago, people began finding each other saying, "Why are all the trees being cut down? What's going on around here?" And we began talking, and we eventually formed the Quincy Tree Alliance to make a more planful way to try to protect and support our own trees. We now have over 150 members who care, who care about our trees, who believe that trees are an essential part of our city's health, and that more can be done to protect trees. We're working with all of our city officials and other community groups to expand what's now called the urban forest here in Quincy. I was going to introduce these guys, but that's been done already. So just a quick note, they're each going to speak for 5 minutes, and then we're going to have an opportunity for questions from anybody here, as well as to hear questions that people emailed into us. So thank you very much. And Dan, can I ask you to start?
Oh, okay. Hello, can you hear me okay?
Yes.
All right, thank you very much, Ann. As Ann said, my name is Dan Cathcart, and I'm the tree warden for the city of Quincy. I was appointed that position at the very end of February, so still relatively new in the role. Prior to coming to the city, I had a arboricultural consulting practice, and I focused primarily on tree preservation programs, maintenance plans, inventories, things of that nature in my practice. So I have quite a bit of a appropriate background to bring it and work as a tree warden, because the primary responsibility of a tree warden is to protect the city's assets. And in my case, the assets are trees. And it's a fine line of balancing that between public safety and infrastructure projects and anything else that's going on. But at the end of the day, my goal and my role is to not only preserve what we have, but to develop a more sustainable urban forest moving forward. Climate change, other issues that come up, they're going to happen. How can we best position the city to meet that head on? What certain species can we plant? What are we finding works in this area, not that area? What other supplemental type of green spaces can we add to the urban forest? So there's a lot of pieces, a lot of moving parts to trying to fit that all together, but that's primarily what my role is. Just to touch on a couple of projects that I'm pretty excited about that are at various stages of the horizon, but that are there. We are going to have a comprehensive tree inventory of the city street trees taken that actually goes out to bid later this month, hopefully to be completed by mid to end of summer. So with that, it'll be a ArcGIS type map that you probably have seen around. There will be a public-facing section so that you'll be able to find information about particular areas in the city. But what it's going to work for me is a great tool to understand what areas are underserviced, where density of canopy cover is, things like that, so we can allocate funding and budget for some more proactive tree maintenance instead of being very reactionary, which unfortunately most cities are when it comes to your forestry department. You know, a storm comes through, or branches are falling and you have to deal with that. But what we're looking to do is be able to take that to the next step and do some routine sort of maintenance scheduled cycles of pruning so that the trees are in better condition, so you don't have to call and say a branch fell, right? So it makes more sense to do that. So with this tool at our disposal, I'm going to have a lot more ability to crunch the numbers and see where we can move with that. So that's pretty exciting. And it's, with that, we're able to, target species, make sure we're diversifying species that we plant, and all those kind of things. So it's going to be a very helpful tool. Additionally, we were just happy to announce just awarded Tree City USA for the 25th year running from the Arbor Day Foundation. So that just came through the other day. So, I know that tree planting is a big part of this whole kind of master plan of ours. So we do that every year, but I also wanted to mention that recently over $1 billion from the federal government has been allocated through the U.S. Forestry Department for planting in economically challenged areas. And I'm in the process of writing a grant to try to secure some of those funds to increase our planting plans over the next few years. We plant between 400 and 500 trees a year, so we're looking to expand on that over the next 5-year period if we're awarded this grant to increase primarily in our underserviced communities even more trees. So that's pretty exciting stuff too. A couple other programs we're looking at are Quincy 400 is coming up in a couple of years. We just met with the mayor the other day, and he's excited about locating finding some locations within the city that can sustain and are appropriate to take a larger size planting of a specimen type tree and sort of be celebratory trees for the 400th anniversary, ones that the next generation will have as a historic tree, looking back and have some historic significance. So the Quincy Tree Alliance is working with us on working on up some locations so that we can work up to that planting as well. And we're also, it's at probably further back on the horizon, and I haven't given up on a heritage tree program for the city of Quincy, something more on the recognizing a particularly special tree, whether it's size, historic significance, the aesthetics of a particular scene, to be able to have a mechanism to protect that tree and allow future generations to sort of a protection to perpetuity sort of a basis. So those are just a few of the things that we're working on. There's always the sort of the quote unquote everyday stuff, when they're paving another street and some of the trees have to come down, and it's I never like to take a good healthy tree down. Oftentimes it's a balance too. Is a tree declining and going to be dead in a year or so? Do we take it now so that we don't repave and re-sidewalk and then cut it down a year later and have a stump with a tree pit that we could have planted this year? So there is a little bit of that. There's all, and of course public safety, if even trees that put out a full canopy might be at risk for failure, and that has to be taken into account. I also want to mention too that when I do look at tree risk, I do have some tools at my disposal for some more advanced tree risk assessment. I have this device called the resistance drill, and it's a high precision drill. It's a 2 millimeter bit that drills into a tree and measures the relative soundness of the wood. And it kind of reads out electronically like an EKG, sound wood, or cavity, or whatever. So that with that device, I can see inside the tree, basically. And just to give you an example of how that is useful, is we went up to Faxon Park Road, going up the hill from Quincy Ave, and there's a tree on there, big oak tree, that's got a really bad scar on it. Must have been hit by a car or something at one point. It looks pretty scary, but we took the resistance drill up, took measurements, and that wound is purely superficial. There's no decay inside the tree at all. So that decision, it was one that you could see somebody saying, we better take that down, look at this damage. We're able to actually look and say, you know what? It looks bad, but it's healing over, it's very compartmentalized, and the tree has sound wood. So, with those tools, we're not as apt to maybe by mistake take down something that we didn't need to, right? So, that's how we kind of want to look at all of the trees. What can we do to maximize canopy? And in some cases that's, it might be more of a long-term plan. You know, if a tree is almost dead, it's got some leaves on, it's not dead, but it's declining and will be, does it make sense to, you know, even though the replacement tree might be smaller, you know, over the course of a couple of years, it'll have more canopy, providing more eco-services to us, so we make that decision. So all those things kind of go across my desk every day. And I think I probably talked for more than 5 minutes,
Oh,
but
that was great.
I could keep going if you want. I do want to mention too that, this isn't a pat on my back, but I am a ISA, which is the International Society of Arboriculture, board certified master arborist, municipal specialist, tree risk assessment qualified, Massachusetts certified arborist, and a Massachusetts qualified tree warden. So I do carry the credentials, have the background. I've been in arboriculture all my life. I just wanted to point that out because it is kind of relevant. Thank you.
We never doubted you. Could I ask that since we're in Quincy first, that I introduce, did we know, anyone else know that Quincy has an environmental scientist? I was surprised, but I'm delighted to introduce Heather Liss.
Thank you very much. Can everyone hear me okay on this one? Great. So, as you heard, my name is Heather Liss, and I am the city's environmental scientist. I started last fall, so I'm still relatively new to the city, but I grew up not too far away, and I've worked in some other municipalities and done some open space management and conservation type work. So, really excited to be here in Quincy and working on projects and other initiatives for the city. So my job has a few different components to it. Broadly speaking, I'm responsible for the long-term maintenance and management of our natural resources. And my understanding is that a few years ago, when the mayor created the Department of Natural Resources, he took a number of existing departments and put them under this new umbrella, including parks, cemetery, forestry, in addition created the tree warden position, and then also created the environmental division, which is my position. And again, my understanding is that a lot of the impetus was that there are open spaces that weren't getting as much attention as they deserved. You know, not through negligence, simply because there wasn't necessarily somebody assigned to them, or maybe it wasn't apparent that they needed some maintenance. So, for example, my predecessor did a restoration project at Butler's Pond, a dredging, complete restoration of the habitat and the water quality, and I'm gearing up to do a similar thing at Sailor's Pond. So, you know, that one maybe if you looked at, you could tell a little more that there's a problem because the water is a very pea green color, but you might not know if you're not familiar with aquatic biology. So that was sort of how my position came about. In addition to those kind of projects, currently working on the Furnace Brook Restoration Project. If you've driven along Furnace Brook anytime recently, you've probably seen the large construction projects from the project manager for the city on that. And so some projects will be larger, like a dredging project or a flood control and restoration project. There's also smaller projects. I know one of the questions that came up was about sort of our goals and visions, and some of mine are really broad and some are small. Like I'd love to set up a little pollinator garden somewhere with some appropriate trees, you know, for shading a portion of the site. So there's little things like that, and it's been very encouraging so far because my input has been, you know, valued, and I've been asked about what are your goals. Obviously, there's things that the city has, you know, prioritized, and there's things that we have funding for. But I'm also exploring all the options out there and what funding is available. So when it comes to more of a maintenance, long-term maintenance, I'm looking at. So I'll go back to the example of Butler's, where the big restoration happened last year. So it's not over now. In that there's some plants that need to replace because we had a drought last year. There's some invasives that are still creeping around the edges that we need to treat. There are some trees that had to come down to just give access to the pond, so I'm looking to replant some trees there. And you know, so that work will continue. Luckily, we have some amazing friends groups. We have the Quincy Tree Alliance. I mean, I feel very lucky to work in a community that has this many people that are advocating for the environment and are interested and involved. Not every community is like that. And so that's sort of one I would say the main element of what I do. I also am responsible for some amount of planning and sort of long-term planning. One of the projects that I'll be working on more once we pass, but now spring is like the busy time for parks, and so you gotta get the plants in the ground, you gotta check everything out that you can only do this time of year. But when we get to the cooler months, I'm gonna return to the open space and recreation plan. We have a draft plan, and I'm gonna be revising that and submitting it to the state. And the benefits of that are twofold. One is kind of obvious, it helps the city plan. What are our priorities? We've had some public meetings in the past, so we have some good input, and we have a nice template. I might expand those a little bit, add a little more background information, make sure that our inventory is up to date, or as up to date as it can be. And then the second piece is submitting it to the state, the Division of Conservation Services, which makes the city eligible for some state grants. You have to have an approved open space and recreation plan in order to do that. And so, in addition, there's always different initiatives going on for whatever the big issues of the day are. So of course, there's multiple working groups on climate change. Some more regional ones on invasive species. I've been asked to participate in some of those, which I'm happy to do. The third component is education and outreach. And this is a perfect example, coming and talking to all of you, which I'm happy to do. I have a goal to try to make more connections with the schools. I have elementary school kids, and I know how excited and engaged they can get, and then that information trickles upward, into the community, and so that's something I'd love to do. I have, before my municipal experience, I do have a research background in ecology, and so, if there's some opportunity, I'd love to maybe do a little bit of citizen science. There's a lot that you can do with trees, probably working with these guys here, but there's a lot that people observe and know, people know about your neighborhood better than we do necessarily, because you see it every day. And so there's a lot of things like that that I'm really looking forward to doing. And then the final piece I would say is sort of recreation, like a passive recreation. So my predecessor, during the COVID closures, made excellent use of her time and put together an interactive trails guide. It's on our website. There's a QR code if you have a cell phone, you can click on that. And it's really wonderful. She mapped out trails in more passive parks and more wooded areas. A lot of them go through areas where there are trees. And so I'm inspired to kind of keep that going, and also just to spread the word. Not everybody knows that we have something like that. Unlike these guys, I'm going to check my notes in case I forgot anything significant. But that is in a broad nutshell. Oh, I also wanted to mention that I'm on the Stormwater Advisory Committee. So there's some overlap. I do a lot of collaboration with other departments, getting to know people and working with DPW to maybe do a tiny restoration after some drainage work is done, working with the building department and the Conservation Commission to permit projects for natural resources, and then state and federal agencies as needed too. So I enjoy that part of things. I think that many other things will probably come up as we discuss, but that's the broad brush nutshell of what I'm working on.
Well, I just learned a whole lot. One second, I do want to remind everyone to please take some of the materials, take a look. Hannah will point out some of the contact information, but please sign up to keep getting more information. And now I'm very happy to introduce Ryan Fawcett from the Department of Conservation and Recreation.
And Greening the Gateway Cities is a statewide program that kind of came out of this other program called the Asian Longhorn Beetle Reforestation Program. And that was the whole thing back in the 2000s. The Asian Longhorn Beetle came to Worcester, and it pretty much kills all the maple trees in the area and a few other different species. But as some of you may know, maple makes up a huge portion of our forest in New England, and especially Massachusetts. So in order to stop the spread of that invasive the state and the federal government decided to remove a lot of the host plant material that was in their quarantine zone, which is a big chunk of Worcester County. They ended up removing like 10,000 or 20,000 different trees or something like that, which it's not great, but it worked. They've done a really good job containing that invasive, the Asian longhorn beetle, and as kind of a way to make up for cutting down all those trees, we created the Asian longhorn beetle reforestation program, where we hired foresters like me, and then we hired crews from the area. So we hired a bunch of laborers and assistants and all that stuff. And we went around and we knocked on people's doors. I say we, but I mean I wasn't there. We knocked on people's doors and we talked to them like, hey, I know you got a tree removed. Would you like us to plant one? We can do it setback. We can do it in your front yard or your backyard. We can do street trees. We can do all that kind of stuff. And we'll plant anything that you want, but we'll plant pretty much any kind of shade tree that you want, as long as the Asian longhorn beetle or the emerald ash borer doesn't feed on it. So that started, and we planted tons of trees, thousands and thousands of trees in that quarantine zone. It was a really big success. So everybody loved it, and the state created this Green in the Gateway Cities program. And the Gateway Cities, there's about 24 of them throughout the state. They're kind of spread out from Pittsfield to like the Hyannis area of Barnstable. And there's a number of different metrics of how we decided what a gateway city was, but I think it happened back in like 2010 or something like that. Things like income level, English as a second language, canopy cover. That's how we decided where we were going to plant these trees, or at least operate our program. So in Quincy, we have 2 planting zones in Quincy that we operated. So that means that anybody who lives in these zones can have a tree planted on their property, on their street, as long as Dan says it's okay.
Looks like New Jersey on that map.
It kind of does. Yeah, so our 2 planting zones in Quincy, I wish it could be the whole city, but the Executive Office of Energy and Environmental Affairs, which is a tongue twister, but they created these areas in all these different gateway cities where we can plant trees. And again, they did that based on a whole bunch of different metrics, things like English as a second language, percentage of renters versus homeowners, age of the houses, a lot of different things. And in Quincy, they came up with these 2 areas. One is Wollaston and North Quincy, with a little bit of like the Montclair neighborhood in there. I'm looking over there. The online people can't see it, but there's a little bit of a map. And then the other area is Germantown and I guess Adams Shore. So in those areas, anybody can get a tree planted for totally free. You just have to call a number and someone will get back to you eventually. It's me, I'm gonna do it as fast as I can. Yeah, so I started with this program back in 2015. I was a laborer. I dug a lot of holes and planted a lot of trees. I feel like I've probably personally dug like over 5,000 really big holes and planted these trees in. So I feel like I've earned from the bottom to where I am now. It's been pretty good. From there, I went back to school at UMass. I got my master's at UMass Amherst, a good one. I got my master's. I wrote my thesis on teaching folks how to prune trees. So, like, taking one of you all from out there, how long do I need to talk at you about pruning a tree and let you experiment doing it until you can do it to the satisfaction of me or another qualified arborist? So it'd be like how long it would take you to learn how to prune a tree before Dan said, all right, I'll let you go out in my street and prune a tree. We focused on small stuff, small trees that you can prune with 2 feet on the ground. So it's a little bit of citizen science, a little bit of arboriculture. And it was a really great thing to study, and I'm really hoping to work with communities out there to kind of push that, get some folks out there pruning trees and helping us take care of them. So after that, I did a whole bunch of other stuff, and now I'm here in Massachusetts. And it's been really great so far. I grew up in Springfield, so it was nice to come home to the state. And so back to what my actual job is, rather than me talking about myself for a while. Like I said, anybody who lives in these areas can get a tree planted. And the goal of us planting these trees is that we want to raise the canopy cover. So there's tons and tons of benefits that go along with having trees in your neighborhood, in your community, in your general area. Things like they filter the air, they reduce particulate matter in the air, they help stormwater infiltration, they soak up carbon, they create shade which lowers the air temperature and the surface temperature. I can go on for a long time. But anyway, most of those benefits come from the leaves of the tree. So if you have a tree with more leaves on it, it's going to be able to provide those benefits a lot more than a tree that has like a small dogwood tree that just, like it's like 20, 25 feet tall at most. So we want to plant those big trees, we want to plant the oaks, we want to plant the maples, we want to plant the tulip trees that get 50, 60 feet tall, so we can have the most canopy possible. But the challenge that we face is, and this is like the #1 rule for any urban forestry, is right tree, right place. You can't put an oak tree in a 2-foot strip on the sidewalk because it's going to destroy the road, it's going to destroy the sidewalk, it's going to destroy the curb, which, you know, yeah, and under the wires, you don't want, there's a lot of issues that go along with planting the wrong tree in the wrong spot. So it's a matter of working with residents and talking to them about, hey, this is your property, what do you use it for, or your house where you live? What do you use this for? Do your kids play ball in the backyard or in the front yard? Do you cut through anywhere to get from your driveway to your front door? Figuring out the patterns of use in their property and what they want to get out of where they live. And so there's lots of different trees out there. There's hundreds of types of trees that grow. Not all of them are native to this environment, to this region, I should say. So we have a lot to work with. It's kind of thinking of like a palette. So all these different trees are different colors in like an artist palette, and they all have a different role to fill. They all evoke different emotions or fill different roles in your life, in your property, whatever. So let's see. Right tree, right place is the most important thing, and that's where we run into a lot of kind of the issues where one of the things that could happen is I might have a homeowner who has a yard that's like a whole acre or something like that, and they might just want a single dogwood, which is a small flowering tree in their yard. And you know, I want to plant them trees. I don't want to plant just a small flowering tree in their giant yard. So it's a matter of working with them and educating them. We have lots of materials that we give people. We have whole spiels that we have for telling people why trees are good and all that stuff. So I'm a little bit of a tree salesman, even though it's a free program.
Keep upselling.
Yeah. You keep upselling. It's like, what's another 10 feet? But yeah, so it's working with these homeowners, trying to educate, I shouldn't say homeowners, working with residents, trying to educate them on why they should get a tree in their yard, why we can't put this tree right up against their foundation, why we can't put this tree near their water pipe or gas line or something like that, and why I don't want to put a tiny cherry, small flowering cherry in the middle of their giant yard or their park. Which, there's nothing wrong with those trees, but you know, my goal and our program's goal is to create the most canopy possible. So in Quincy, we've had kind of a long process. We've planted around 1,900 trees in Quincy. We have a goal. We don't really have a set goal. We like to imagine that we could get to 5 trees per acre, which is really kind of a hard thing to achieve. But we don't want to set a limit. We have a lot of time left in this program to try to plant trees in these neighborhoods. So I'm really looking forward to working with Dan, working with people who live in the area and the city to try and find, I'm not trying to leave it up, sorry. Working with the city.
We just met.
Yeah. And on top of that, like I said, I work out in Taunton and a couple other cities. We just hired because I have recently switched to a regional position, and we just hired a forester dedicated to the city of Quincy who just started on Monday, which is great. His name is James he couldn't come tonight because he just started this job, so he's got a lot of other things to worry about.
Yesterday?
Yeah. And he's great. He's going to be working with me. I'm going to get him really oriented in Quincy, and we're gonna hit the ground running. So yeah, I look forward to talking to you all.
I just wanted to mention one thing I forgot to mention. I didn't have my notes, like Heather, or I would have remembered. But as both Ryan and Heather mentioned, one of the other kind of goals of my job is going to be engaging more community groups and doing things like pruning workshops, watering workshops, planting workshops, and trying to be as connected with the community as we can. So that's, I think, whether it's Brian in the state or Heather and I in the Natural Resources Department, that's a big focus for all of us, and a lot of support with our Commissioner Dave Murphy and with the mayor as well to try to increase that connection with the community and how we can develop that and really move things forward. So I did want to mention that.
All right, thanks you guys. That was great. I don't know who primed you on some of those questions because you guys just, went through and answered some of the things that we plan to ask. So I'm just going to start off with one question, but maybe to ask each of you, but you can, have kind of a quick answer, and then we're going to just start taking questions from you guys, okay? And we have some others we can throw at these guys in case you guys get quiet for a second, but to start it off, because I think you guys can all talk a little bit about this. So we're really excited about the tree inventory happening, and Dan, you touched on a bunch of the different reasons why it's going to be such a useful tool for the city. But I'm curious if you guys just wanted to talk about tree inventory a little bit more specifically, like as it might relate to maximizing environmental benefits or like with climate resiliency, like so how you might use it as a tool, or if it would even be something that would get incorporated like into the open space and recreation plan, or if that's kind of a done deal that I'm not clear on. And also like working with DCR, like if that's something that then could feed into like species selection and stuff for that program, and communication. So it'd be great if you guys could each just take like a minute to like kind of get into a little more nitty gritty on why the tree inventory is going to be really an awesome asset for all of us.
I think you answered your own question. All those things right there. So, yes. So just to kind of give you an idea, when we do a tree inventory, the comprehensive one like this, we're going to gather every tree site. Okay, so that may be a live stem or a dead stem, a tree in the ground, a stump where a tree may have been removed, or an empty planting site. So with that information, first of all, we have a more accurate assessment of what's out there, where can we go plant now, kind of a thing, because we might have identified, there's 1,400 empty tree pits. We can go, maximize our plantings there with as little other efforts of cutting sidewalks or whatever else. So we'll have that, but when we collect the data, it will have tree species, the size of it, the DBH, diameter of crest height of the tree, like I said, the species, probably the approximate height. We'll capture that information so that we'll be able to do, with a click of a button, how many maple trees do we have? Right, how many red maple trees do we have? Right, how many Armstrong red maple trees do we have? And be able to really look at that, because we do try to follow, we don't want to have a monoculture, right? We don't want to go plant too much of any one thing. Ryan certainly covered the right tree, right spot. We spend a lot of time thinking that out, or we did this year as we're planning for the fall street tree planting. We spent quite a bit of time on species selection. What's the right location for these species? We have to deal with salt tolerance, bad soils, drought tolerance, all these other factors, what will work in these tough, to be honest, planting a street tree in a city, all the stars have to align for that to be successful. We're gonna, unfortunately, from prior to any of us, a lot of trees were planted a few years back along the streets that didn't make it. So those are all going to have to come out. I mean, I don't think we'll get too much complaints because they're all dead, but they're going to be replanted with hopefully better technique in the planting, because that's where it all starts. Well, actually, it all starts with the right selection of the species, also inspecting the actual stem to make sure the plant is good before we put it in the ground. Proper planting, breaking up of the root ball, augmenting the soil, watering, and then this kind of leads right into one of the, like I said, maybe, community involvement, volunteerism on maybe developmental pruning of the young trees so that we don't have problems down the road when they do start to maybe come in conflict with utility lines and things like that. But back to the tree inventory part of it. Also, we'll be able to, one of the other things we're going to identify is primary maintenance need, right? So if they're doing an inventory and the tree is dead, we'll know that. We'll know, all right, where do we have to go to get all the dead ones out, make the place safe, or if it's a different kind of categories of maintenance pruning, all right, now I know I can query that and look, all right, I'm in, Ward 1, Precinct 1, I've got 4 days of maintenance pruning there. Ward 4, Precinct 5, I got 5 days there. So I'll be able to, do the budgeting and things like that. But as far as the public-facing side of it too, I mentioned that, we will have, the goal will be to have different sub-maps, walking maps of significant trees. You'll be able to pull out that and walk through and recognize those. And with your phone these days, you tap on it, it'll tell you the information about the tree. We're also going to tie it to the information from iTrees, which some of you may be familiar with. It's a software out there that can return actual figures as far as the environmental services that the tree provides. Your typical tree this size of this species takes up X amount of gallons of stormwater, sequesters X amount of carbon in its lifetime, produces X amount of oxygen, all that, so you kind of will be able to quantify that. And that also helps on the other side of the big picture of, if we replace this many trees, we're actually, it's a X amount of dollar savings for the city and, urban heat index, and all those kind of things. So those are the main pieces that I would see from the tree warden side of it. But yeah, there's more, I think, that Heather can answer. Is that a minute? Talk too much.
Okay, 2 very quick things before I answer the question. I guess I didn't quite address some of the things that these guys addressed with the background. I feel compelled to say that I have a master's in ecology and environmental biology from UMass Boston. Yeah, normally I wouldn't pat myself on the back, but you kind of teed that up. And the second thing is I wanted to sort of respond to something you said earlier about how many people knew that Quincy had an environmental scientist. And it's a good point. There are actually it's very unusual for a municipality to have a position like mine. Sometimes, somebody will do similar work that's rolled into, Parks and Open Space Department, or maybe they're doing the, wetlands regulations and then they do some open space management on the side. So I have to thank Mayor Koch and the Commissioner of Natural Resources, David Murphy, for their support in having this position. Based on how much is going on right now, I definitely feel like it was worthwhile to set up this position. And then back to the actual question about the tree inventory. So, yeah, of course I'm not going to be using it quite to the extent that Dan is, but it's absolutely a very valuable tool. I can tell you, for my own projects, I like to document things really carefully, and although I may do a project and those trees don't necessarily immediately go into the inventory, we will always have plans of some kind. And so one of the things I'm trying to do in the office is just to organize the plans and the files for the different types of projects that I work on or will be working on. And then there are times that I have used the existing data that we have a number of times for, it's not really for one specific thing, it could be for a wide range of things. So I'll return to Sailor's Pond, one of the things I mentioned earlier. So along Bryce Road, which goes right along the pond, there are a bunch of very large oak trees, magnificent trees. The oak trees lose a lot of leaves because they've got this great big canopy, and those leaves migrate into the pond, and that does cause some of the problems with the quality of the water. You don't have a lot of turnover, there's not a lot of oxygen. As they decompose, the organisms that decompose them use up even more of the oxygen. Should we cut down the oak trees because of that? I would say no, because they're also providing shade to the pond, and that shade is going to decrease the temperature of the water and offset some of that negative impact, and kind of do the opposite. And so I've looked at the database at times to say, okay, well, let me strategize in this area. So when we eventually do the dredging and restoration at Sailor's Pond, I'm looking at what stormwater improvements can we make in the area, and how do trees, come into play. Do we do some tree box filters, like an individual tree that's stormwater directed to it, or do we do some selective pruning or selective removals of some young saplings that maybe are a less desirable species, so that we can keep these magnificent oaks. So that's sort of an example. And I imagine that, I may use it more as there's more information going into it. But I do find it really helpful to look at the city as a whole, and what is the makeup of our urban forest? What else what are we missing? Or are we selecting species that are going to work in this environment if it's a little warmer, if we change to a different zone, a different planting zone in the future? And so that kind of overview and seeing that information is really helpful. I sense that you would like to respond to that. But I'm going to let the
I have something
moderator.
to say, really quick, very quick, I
Very
promise.
quick.
So the inventory that we're talking about is a street tree inventory, right? The approximately 20,000 trees along the street, identified stem by stem. We will also recognize other forested areas, but more as a unit, right? So Faxon Park would be a forested area bounded, but what we'll be able to do with that is, based on canopy cover, still recognize what those ecosystem services are that the whole area is providing. Maybe not on a tree-by-tree basis in a park, but the park as a whole. So there will be specific information on the street trees, and then the other green spaces, other parts of the urban forest, will be sort of blocks of space.
All right.
Right?
Do you want
Sure.
to touch on?
Yeah, I think my co-panelists did a really good job at touching on how municipalities can and will use this inventory data. I think it extends beyond just inventory to you can take those tree points and you can make other GIS applications with it. So we have a GIS analysis on our staff and the Gateway Cities program, and she's great. She helps us make all kinds of maps where it'll show me the trees we planted compared to impervious surfaces, or compared to like tax parcels and all that stuff. So it really helps me target where I want to send my outreach to. It really helps me target what species I want to plant going forward and all that kind of stuff. And I'm sure you'll be able to use it in a similar way.
All right, great. Nice and short. Thanks. All right, so we'd like to open it up to the audience. If anyone wants to stand up and ask their question, then maybe I'll repeat it to the QATV mic. Yeah.
Hi. Well, first off, I really appreciate what you're doing. And my question has to do with, I guess, tree maintenance, and not planting and cutting down, but more trees are getting older, they're getting moribund, and I'm concerned about invasive species, pests that affect the trees, and how we're dealing with ensuring that trees that are getting older live out their lifespans, and we can also deal with the toxins and the invasive pests that might be affecting the trees in the city.
Okay, so just to repeat it, it's really it's a maintenance question regarding the aging trees in our community and the pests that exist or might come in our near future, and how the city, and you can touch on the state too if you'd like, Brian, but how the city's thinking about that and addressing that in terms of maintenance and future planning.
Sure, thank you. Great question. And that kind of rolls back to being more proactive than reactive, right? So we are, a part of the grant that I had mentioned earlier is focused towards underserviced neighborhoods, but what that might be able to do is allow us to redirect funds to other areas of the city that were designated for those areas so that we can maximize for the entire city. But the whole goal is to take a more proactive maintenance approach so that it's, especially on the mature trees, like you said, that the best defense against a pest is a healthy tree, right? And the best way to keep a tree healthy is to, well, give it everything it can to sustain itself. So, if a tree has got a dead branch in it and it's trying to kind of squeeze off that branch and heal over where that branch was, that's diverting energy away. So even, you have public safety, a dead branch falls, that could cause problems, but it also is a drain on the energy resources of a tree that might have been used elsewhere in the tree for defense against pests. So if we are able to be more proactive, get a maintenance rotation kind of cycle over, a city this size would probably be looking at a 3 or 4 year cycle as we work through the city, ward and precinct at a time through the city and keep the trees as healthy as we can. That's, that's number one. And we also did just start a sort of a pilot program, if you will, where we picked some significant trees, a couple right outside here at the library, the big beech tree, the lindens along the street, the dogwoods, several, about 8 trees over in Mount Walson Cemetery, a few beech, a magnificent tulip tree that's 141 feet.
Yeah.
Thereabouts, roughly, which is up for state champion, we hope, with the DCR. It's in the running, but what we're doing is adding some supplemental fertilization and monitoring and pest control as needed. It's not something we take an IPM approach, which you might be aware is a holistic approach. We don't, the days of going out and just spraying everything, especially in a city setting, we don't do that anymore. So it'd be targeted approaches if we need to with, maybe it's a soil drench with a systemic material that, we try to use environmentally responsible materials and not in a broadcast method, more targeted approach, because unfortunately we might be looking at a pretty bad pest coming, beech leaf disease. It's a nematode-based disease. It's relatively new on the disease circuit. So that's proving to be quite a problem. But with those particular trees I mentioned, we're set up to monitor and see if the disease presents itself and then treat accordingly, which if this particular disease is life cycle, you don't know it till the leaves come out. You'll see the results of it, but luckily enough, the appropriate treatment is in the fall. So to prevent it from next year coming out. So we're kind of set up to deal with it if we see it. So there's, those parts, and of course we're always on the lookout for emerald ash borer or heaven forbid the Asian longmorn beetle. Touchwood, spotted lanternfly hasn't quite made it yet. But there's, we're all very cognizant of that, and I attend many workshops and webinars and stuff on the newest pests and newest techniques to stay up on that, so that we can keep ahead of the game on that. So, my priority around maintenance is public safety, high-risk trees, then into large tree maintenance. Because, Ryan said it doesn't take a math genius to do the volume of canopy of a 2.5-inch tree that you just planted compared to a 35-inch mature oak tree and the volume of the canopy. So those are what we want to keep. So
Thank you.
you're welcome.
I had a conversation with the mayor a few years ago about street trees, and he told me something I had never really thought about, and it was about like those salt machines that go around in the wintertime and spray. And he told me that at some point the DPW bought some kind of machine that sprayed a lot farther and covered more, territory than, on the street than the older machines. I don't know, maybe they're very expensive, but and that had a bad effect on street trees. And I don't know, I see when on my street, like the salt is going, it's not just staying on the street. The salt that's been sprayed is going basically around the street trees in my driveway and stuff too. And I don't know if they could, if you've thought about that, or if you can investigate whether they can have for smaller, maybe they need these wide ones for large roads, and maybe it's not practical to have two different kinds of machines, but the salt should be like, I assume that's a real big problem in terms of the health of the street tree.
Absolutely. And, not having been here for the past or previous winters, I hadn't thought of that yet, actually. I mean, I know to me, salt is bad, but I didn't realize that there might be a mechanical solution to mitigating some of that salt damage. So that's something I would definitely, keep our luckily, I don't know, we haven't had to use as much in these last years, which gives us a whole other set of problems. But I'll definitely keep an eye on that type of thing, because if it's a setting, maybe you need the bigger one on Washington Street, but you don't need it on the side roads, right? So there could be a more strategic way to look at that, so definitely keep that in mind.
Yes.
One way of mitigating the salt problem is to use brine instead of rock salt, because you can very targeted spray the brine into the road and it doesn't fly all over the place. And the second thing is we live in Quincy Pine, for 25 years. And all I see is that basically trees on private property are disappearing one by one. That is basically when there were huge trees there, for instance, on River Street, but they were in the backyard, so then the house gets sold, it gets made over, and as a result of it, all the trees being cut down and replaced with ornamental shrubbery. And then it looks almost like a suburb of LA, which no mature trees left anymore, just houses. It's sad.
It is.
Is there any mechanism to incentivize homeowners to take a second look and not cut down the mature trees?
So then I just want to repeat so that QATV and everyone can hear. So one, and we can follow up a little bit with the salt or the de-icing compound, but I think the second question was a great one, which is seeing a lot of trees on private property being removed. And I think that it'd be good, maybe Dan, for you to speak a little bit to our Quincy's tree ordinance, our current tree ordinance, but also just if there are any mechanisms or ways to maybe promote people not cutting down their private trees too. So this is definitely, it's kind of two questions in one. Maybe it's what is the ordinance, and maybe how could the ordinance be augmented, to that end, and maybe on advocacy level as well.
Yeah, the first part I can answer easily. The second part is a tough one, right? So currently there is a tree protection ordinance in the city of Quincy. It goes into effect if a building permit is requested or applied for. So if, in other words, you're putting an addition on your house and your trees will be impacted, or you're a developer, you're going to redo an area, whatever the scenario is, if it involves a building permit that triggers a mechanism for me to decide whether the tree ordinance is in effect or not. So its tree ordinance says any significant tree that's 8 inches in diameter or larger is going to be removed for, well, first you have to identify on the site your significant trees, whether it be on the building plans or a separate plan, which ones are significant. And then if any of those trees need to be removed for the project to proceed, they have to be mitigated, or if they're going to stay on site, they need to be protected. Right? So tree protection zone, fencing. If they're going to be removed, they have to either be replaced inch per inch with a minimum 3-inch trees on site. So if you cut down a 30-inch tree, you'll have to plant 10 3-inch trees on the property. In some of these cases, there isn't enough room to reasonably plant those. So the other option is to pay a fee, or not a fine, but a fee into the tree planting fund that we use to replant across the city. So that is how we sort of try to eliminate developers coming in and just wiping out the entire area to replant. But it also does come into effect for homeowners. If you're looking to put a large addition on and you didn't have much of a backyard and you have to take down all your trees, that tree ordinance does come into effect there as well. So in order for that to, your plans to be approved, I have to approve the tree study and the mitigation plan. So that's what mechanism we have in place now. If you're just a homeowner, I don't mean just a homeowner, but if you're a homeowner and you have a tree in your backyard and you want to cut it down, at this point there's no mechanism to stop you. And that's unfortunate, but you know, there's the flip side of that. You know, that's one extreme. We have no control over it. The other side is a program like the city of Cambridge has, where you need a permit to remove any tree, significant tree. They drop theirs to 6 inches, and even if a tree in your backyard is dead as a doornail, hasn't had a leaf on it in 6 years, you still need to get a permit and go through the process. You'll get one, but it's again to sort of, you know, it's to maintain the canopy. So that's the other extreme, where you know you are very controlled in what you can do. Somewhere in the middle is where I'd like to land, but it's I think probably a bit of a ways off to have an enforceable ordinance on homeowners and their property, tell them what they can and cannot do. But that's where I also like the idea of a heritage tree program, where it's you voluntarily, you know, you have a tree nominated, whether it's yours or whether you go to your neighbor and say, hey, we'd love to nominate a tree. But there's an agreement there that the tree will not be cut down, barring, you know, becoming a hazard, hit by lightning, it's dead, whatever. You know, certain conditions, otherwise the tree is preserved. And, you know, I think trying to work that angle, and really a lot of it's going to just try to be the outreach and education, and try to let people know the benefit, or lack of benefit, really, the kind of what you have on the flip side for taking down a mature tree like that. So it's tough. It's a tough one because of the fact that there is nothing in place now, and it's hard to find that middle ground either. It's one or the other. You either have to do it for everything, or you don't do it at all. So trying to find that middle ground, you know, maybe with something like a heritage tree program, we might take a step in that direction. But it's going to take, you know, it's going to take a lot of interacting with the community, and maybe many more times that question gets asked to be able to get enough support to do it.
Can I ask a question? This is a different perspective, but just take that a little beyond, you know, what Dan is suggesting, which, hopefully something like that will happen, something that makes sense for Quincy. So when we're thinking about what we have now, when we're talking about private property, there are a couple of times when trees could potentially be regulated. If trees are in a wetland area, or if they're within the buffer zone, there's a regulatory buffer zone around wetlands, that's a trigger for review, then those might need to get approval from conservation staff or conservation commission. In addition, if there is a larger development and a lot of trees are coming down, and we don't have as many parcels here as in some communities, but those projects need to go through a site plan review. And I haven't looked into exactly what the rules and regulations are here, but in most communities there's some oversight by a planning board or similar. So there are a couple of things now that may help. And then, beyond that, when we're thinking about private property, there's regulation, and then there's incentivizing or educating people to just make a decision about their own property in the absence of a binding regulation. And Dan was getting at that with the education. I mean, for some folks, it might be getting something that shows the number of what they're saving in heating costs because of the shading of the tree on their house and the cooling effect of the transpiration when that tree is growing. For other people, it might be, some information about all the critters that are using the tree. That would be me. I love the critters. But, some people, when they realize the connection, and again, clearly that was myself, like just falling in love with how everything is connected and how a tree, even one tree, it's not just that tree. And I think that's the other thing that's unique about an urban setting like this, where our trees, it's more than just one tree, because we don't have as many as some places, just by nature of being an urban area, so they're all just that much more valuable. And to do a very brief personal anecdote, when I finished undergrad, I lived in Boston for a number of years, and we had some trees in the back. I don't even think they were on the landlord's property, but our balcony was right in the canopy of these trees, and to this day, I think we had the best apartment in that whole building, because I saw more wildlife there than I've ever seen in the suburbs, or even in rural areas when we go on vacation. And so I got really connected to those, and so there are ways that we can connect people to trees, and I think some of these other programs, like maybe it's not regulation, but maybe it's just celebrating some of these incredible big trees and get people connected, or the tree planting event that we did for Arbor Day at a school. Those kids, I try to challenge them to connect with a tree, and if even a few of them do it, I'll feel like that was a victory. And then the last thing I wanted to say with regard to private versus public property, when I'm looking at things through the lens of ecology, landscape ecology is a field of ecology where you're looking at, from sort of a bird's eye view to some extent, what do we have in this matrix of habitats? We have some construction over here, we have some green space here, and what are the connections between those? We really need those wildlife corridors and those little refuges for our wildlife and people to enjoy. And so, not that I want to necessarily identify private properties and put a bullseye or a star or whatever on them, but when we're doing things like open space planning, we can roughly identify, look at these areas, and that can help the city. Maybe we see that there's a gap, and we do have this tiny city parcel that maybe we wouldn't have thought was so valuable, but now we realize that's the one lasting connection, because people have taken it down their private trees, as they may have right to do. And so we can try to take some action to improve things.
DCR recently did a kind of a relaunch of our Legacy Tree program. And so you are able to go, if you Google DCR Legacy Tree, you can get to a nomination form where you all can nominate any tree you want. And a forester, probably me, will go out and measure the tree. We'll calculate all the width, the height, DBH, all that good stuff. And you can nominate a tree for size, botanical interest, cultural interest, how it looks, and pretty much anything. And it doesn't provide any official protections for the tree, but it's a really great way to kind of educate people because there's a nice map that you can go to and look at all the big trees around the state or in your neighborhood. Quick anecdote, there's a huge elm tree in Back Bay in Boston, which I know is a nice neighborhood, but it's like a giant U, 4 or 5 story complex, and in the alley in this U where there's cars and broken asphalt, there's an elm tree there that had like a circumference of like 40 feet or not 40 feet, like I think it was like 24 feet or something like that. It's like the biggest tree I have seen in Boston, and having this tree has been like a legacy tree, and I think it might be a champion tree. Has like people from the neighborhood saw us standing around this tree, and they're like, "This tree is important. We know this tree is like nominated or a champion tree." So things like that can really help bring people together and help you rally around individuals, and that kind of radiates out from the individual tree, and will radiate out from there. So go nominate a legacy tree.
That's great, thanks. And actually a link to that program, as well as links to some other relevant, like the forestry website and the Quincy Tree Alliance website, are on that little white piece of paper that's standing up. We didn't project anything, but if you want to like take a picture of that, it also has everyone's email address and phone number, in case I forget to say that later. So if you want to take a picture, and you can bring that information home. Lori, you had a question?
Yeah, I just wanted to ask, particularly the tree warden, so if we have a neighbor who is cutting down a large tree in their yard, which has happened several times since I've lived in my neighborhood, they're supposed to have request, if it's more than 6 inches diameter or 10 inches diameter, they're supposed to request then a permit or something for that, or request, or there is no policy? And can we call you and say there's a tree being cut down? Is it legit?
They do not need a permit for that. That's only if it is around a construction project. If they're doing anything that requires a building permit, triggers the ordinance. So, a neighbor just cutting one down is unfortunate, but no, they don't need a permit to proceed with it. I think I was probably when I was referencing Cambridge. So, but if that was confusing, I apologize.
Yes.
A question about when planting new trees, whether it's a street tree or like the gateway greening, is there an education that goes with it? Because sometimes you see street trees and then someone who lives there gets excited and you see like the 2 feet of mulch up against it, or.
But yeah, the question was, do we, any education that goes along with a planting, whether it be a street tree or one of Ryan's that might be in your own backyard or something. At this point, anyone who, I don't think do we do anything with it? As far as like any kind of handouts or anything?
I do, yeah.
You do with yours. I don't think currently we do with the city, but I think what I'm going to suggest is what I've been thinking about that. And my thought was to have a QR code that you could scan. It'd be the same one pretty much, unless it was a specific tree that maybe had a specific need, but would have normal watering requirements, proper mulching technique, because there's absolutely nothing worse for a tree than mulch against the stem of the tree. It's great around the base, but kind of like a donut, you want a little bit of breathing room. A lot of gases get exchanged to the root collar, so that's very important that is allowed to dry out. But people don't know that. So, and they saw, all that mulch, that's probably what I should do. And the next thing you know, it's been this perpetuating practice that makes arborists, that keeps us up at night. Because it's probably the single worst cultural thing you can do to a tree. If that root collar stays wet, it's an entry point for disease. Bugs can get in there, insects come in. It's just a bad thing. Mulch away from the stem, as far out as you can go, is great. You know, it insulates the roots, which is really important in these hot, city streets, retains moisture. Can even, I don't know about you, but if I'm walking down the street and I'm coming along and there's a mulch, I'll just usually walk around it. I don't even walk over it, which helps get compaction. I think it's a human nature thing. It's like a little barrier. You walk around it instead of stepping through it. That helps with the compaction. So yeah, mulching is good, but those sort of things, again, that kind of leads back to the education outreach piece of it. And any mechanism that, in this day and age, it's easy to deliver those messages, those specifications. So it would really be silly not to. So that's, what would be the best way to do that? It might just be sort of a fact sheet that you access through your phone.
Ryan, do you want to talk about?
Sure. Yeah, so we have what we call a new tree owner pamphlet. It's just, the basics are watering, mulching, and pruning. So when we say, I have a conversation with the homeowner resident who's going to be taking care of the tree, and I make sure I really stress, if you're going to water the tree, make sure you're giving it like 10 gallons a week, and don't water it shallow, make sure you water it deep, like low and slow, like barbecue is what I like to tell them. And then make sure that no volcano mulching, that's what we call it, when you pile the mulch up against there, that's the big one that I stressed too. And don't prune the tree for a while unless it's dead, dying, or diseased. And that's usually what I tell the homeowners to stick to. So we have a pamphlet, we give people, U.S. Forest Service has a tree planting guide, we give them that too, and we have lots of handouts. Yeah. And I'm available for them to call if they have issues in the future.
And that's great, and that's, Ryan works more on a one-on-one relationship. I'm coming to your house to plant the tree, so I know who to talk to. Going down the street, it's not as, maybe, it might be someone 3 doors down that's going to take care of that. So having something on the tree that anyone can access, I think will be a good mechanism for us.
In multiple
Yes, in multiple languages, very important.
Yes, no, this is a great communication question prompt, and we've talked a little bit about like new tree plantings having like a tag that then they could get more information with a QR code, or even just like a water meet to deal with some of the drought issues we've had. So I think that'd be great because it could link right to something like the fact sheet that you're describing, Ryan. Just to follow up with another kind of communication question is, how is the city communicating plans for the tree removal and the reasons behind it? Or what your plans are for that. And this might relate to other things you've kind of talked about already, but I think that, as Anne said at the very beginning of the program, a lot of the people who got passionate about joining the QTA or forming the QTA were really upset about seeing stumps and wondering why. So it's really just that big question, why? And so, what might be plans to increase communication, specifically maybe about trees coming down, and maybe in the interim, who's the best person to reach out to, or how to get a hold of you?
The best person to reach out to is Heather. Her cell phone is right under the bus. It's that's a good point, and I think for anything that's sort of project related, I think with the QTA's permission, they're probably going to be my main sounding board for that. Like we did a month or so ago, we're going to be up in Faxon Park, driving along the road, taking dead branches above the street so they don't fall on people when they're driving or walking. We're not taking down any live trees. Might be there's a few dead trees that could have fallen in the road by the looks of them. So we took out those, but it was a public safety thing, and we, to alert you guys so that if someone is driving through and they see tree trucks up there, they contact you, you'll have an answer for them. We have had some discussions about having something like that on our website as well. We do have an area where on our website that advises of where utility pruning is going on when they come through for their circuits, National Grid each year, which we happen to know there's, this year's cycle has many fewer miles than last year's, so it's going to be less of an impact for utility pruning this cycle. But, you know, I think one of the other things that, and with that, there's a place on our website where you can go and see where they're working today. You know, so it's like, why are these guys on ABC Street? And you'll look and you say, oh, National Grid's here doing their thing, as opposed to, you know, if it's not on that schedule and someone is there cutting street trees, yeah, call my office, because that's not good, and we need to bring a stop to that. So yeah, having the information out there so you know when something isn't going the way it should is important as well. And I know I think you have that on your website too, sort of the watchdog thing. You know, you see something here, if it's not on the utility pruning, or, you know, one of our contractors doing work, but if you call me and it's one of our contractors, I would know that. Because if we have someone, you know, say there's a high-risk tree somewhere and they need to go take care of it right away, you know, I might have found out about it last night at 5 o'clock and they're there at 8 the next morning. Getting that message out might be tough, but, you know, fielding that information, be able to, you know, to address those, you know, they're few and far between, but it happens. But if we're having more of a project-based program, like, you know, we're going to be up in Marymount again doing some pruning up at Paget, but it's no more cutting live trees. There's some areas where there are dead branches that need to come out. But when we're getting ready to go up there, we'll let the community know so that and what the kind of our scope is. Again, it'll be public safety. It's not, you know, any more big trees coming out, but those are the kind of things that we're going to communicate with the public so they know as much information as we can provide about what's going on to you know, to cover that. As far as, you know, other pieces that I think kind of fall under that piece would be when they're doing the road paving. Those, you know, that happens inevitably every year. There's a circuit, you know, they do different sections, different roadways, repaving and sidewalks and that. And on those, we typically, most of this year's projects were already in place before I got here. But moving forward, it's going to be, you know, I'll walk or drive in some cases, the streets that are up for paving and identify either trees that are, you know, dead and need to come out, that are severely declined, and like I mentioned earlier, it's going to be dead in a year or two. You know, we'll take it out now. It's not contributing much. You know, it's decaying, and as it stands, it's releasing carbon, not sequestering it. You know, there's those things to factor in. So do we make the decision to take the tree now, even though there's leaves on it? But if it's in severe decline and there's not much of a canopy per se for the stem size, it makes sense to replace it now. So anyway, those trees will be identified on a tree-by-tree basis moving forward for those streets that are going to be that have the infrastructure work done. And if the other kind of mechanism we have in place due to Massachusetts state law is a tree hearing. So say you, Dave, I'm picking on you, you have this beautiful tree in front of your house, but you want to move your driveway. And you call me up and say, can I take this tree down? And I say, Dave, come on, who are you talking to? We can't do that. The tree's perfectly healthy. But if you feel compelled to do so, you can call for a tree hearing and present a case. You might be a lot more compelling evidence than me driving by and looking at that tree's perfectly fine, you know, and moving on. So there is a mechanism in place to try to move forward the removal of a healthy tree. And those are sometimes need to be done interdepartmentally within the city too. DPW says we need to take this one down because it'll make our lives easier. But we can't take that tree down, it's perfectly fine. they might call for a tree hearing, present all that it's gonna cost. X will replant, X, Y, Z, we'll skip the next 4 that we're gonna do, whatever. They present a case and a decision is then rendered off of that. The tree hearings are open to the public, people can all come in and weigh in on them. So that's another mechanism that's in place if it's a street tree. That's Chapter 87, public shade tree law that governs that. So not trees in parks, cemeteries, schools, anything like
I won't make that call.
that. Yeah, I know you won't.
All right, so we have like 5 more minutes, I think. Do you want to follow up?
Yeah.
Yeah, Heather's gonna make a quick
Quite
comment. And then I do just wanna say before you say it, like, if people need to start taking off, because we're getting close to our time. Again, if you wanna go to our website or look on that piece of paper, there's links to the forestry website and natural resources, and then to our website. And you can find some answers to kind of direct questions. We kind of send you back to the city website to specific pages for specific questions. We have an FAQ page, so you can check that out. But also, since we're running low on time too, if you have pressing questions that weren't answered tonight, feel free to email us. And maybe we can round up some more questions and answers and figure out a way to get those answers back out to the community.
We'll definitely, I know we ran long in ran long. So any questions that do come, I do commit to answering those, through Heather and the Tree Alliance and getting the answers back to you.
Okay, here you go, Heather.
My fault.
It's almost like you're the tree warden. I'm talking about trees. I just wanted to comment on tree removals related to projects, since I think that was maybe part of the initial question. So the Department of Natural Resources is really making an effort to put out more information when things like that are going to happen. So for example, at Furnace Brook, there's now a sign that at least gives a brief overview of what the project is. And I'm sorry that wasn't up before trees came down, which would have been helpful, but I was sort of thrown into things as well, and I'll just call Dan next time.
Yeah.
But on a serious note, sometimes you just need to know that there's a plan, right, and that it's not like a new development going in. The contractor is checking on availability for my replanting plan right now. So, there's a lot more to come if you have specific questions about any projects, but generally, and we're trying to put stuff on the website too, understanding our bandwidth, and there's not necessarily, daily updates or weekly updates, but we're trying to put blurbs about the main projects that are going on around the city, and we'll continue to do that. And so, the last thing is, if you see some tree removals coming down in a public area and you just don't really know what's going on, you can always call the main office, the Department of Natural Resources. If it's something I'm working on, they'll know and they'll be able to send it to me. And if it's, a different department or a different individual within our department, we can always get you to somebody who knows.
Great, thanks. All right, maybe we have time for one, depending on how long the answer is, one more question?
For Ryan.
1 or 2? Does anyone?
Well, I think
Go for it,
just
Ann.
1 second. It's more a suggestion, actually. Some of us older, more mature people don't spend our lives looking at websites all the time, and other younger people are too busy. So I'd like to suggest that in addition to putting information on websites and QR codes, that maybe, and by the time there's guys with a saw at the bottom of a tree, it's too late to call you guys. Some information, a little placard explaining that a tree is going to come down and why, so that we're not always feeling surprised by what's happening. It's a suggestion, so you don't even have to answer it.
Yeah, I would also suggest that we look at, this is just on the top of my head because of all the news about the Boston tree ordinance, but I know that there's some language in there just about posting on trees and how far in advance hearings and postings and engaging with the community, and maybe Boston's bigger and has more people who can spend hours doing that, but I think it's still maybe an example we can look at for ways we can use those forms of communication as well. And it's required,
Yeah,
so there you go.
So if the tree warden can deem a tree a hazard. There's a number of
High
reasons
risk.
why a tree warden can remove a street tree, but if there's a public hearing that's happening, it needs to be posted in advance. And I
It's
forget the
posted, it
exact-
needs to be in the
but it's
newspaper,
actually
it
required under
needs to-
Chapter 87.
Yeah, so there's
Newspaper.
a whole process
Right.
for that. And so at the very least, there's a stay of execution, right? So, if nothing else, I mean, granted, the tree hearing is for a healthy tree that we're trying to save. So, it's not like we're tying ourselves to that tree, it was about to be cut down. But it gives us enough mechanism to prepare a good reason why it's not going to come down in the big picture, so anyway.
Right, and there's also links to those regulations on the forestry website as well.
Can I just ask? Oh, sorry,
No,
go
go
ahead.
ahead. No, go ahead.
It's a bit of a twofold. One is, does a homeowner, I've called a few different times over the years requesting trees in my neighborhood, and I've been told that it's up to the homeowner as to whether this is a street tree. So I'm wondering if that is still the case, number one. And that, I guess that goes along with the homeowners cutting down the trees on the private properties, but do they also have the right to refuse trees around their property on the street? That's number one. Number two is, years ago when Wollaston Beach was being done over, I had called requesting trees along the beach for shade, and I was told then that homeowners would fight it and that it wasn't even an option. Just wondering if, as a suggestion, will trees ever be considered a thing along Wollaston Beach as they are in South Boston?
So just to say this again, and we're at time now.
I know,
I think
sorry.
we can keep.
You don't have to answer
going
for
for
us,
you
let's
want,
just
but let's
finish this.
let's do this last question. And it's twofold, as she said, but one's just regarding like wanting to plant trees, and there is like a link to a form on the city website if you want a tree planted in front of your house. But Dan can speak to whether or not you can request trees, down the street, basically, is what you're saying. And whether or not a resident can say, no, do not plant that tree in front of my house. So that's one question. And then maybe Ryan wants to take on
That's it.
whether or not the Department of Conservation and Recreation is the owner of Quincy Shore Drive. So they're the ones responsible for whether or not there's trees along that street. And so maybe he can take a stab at answering that. Yeah.
To answer the first part quickly, we own the sidewalk and we can plant the trees wherever we want. If we're planting a finite number of trees, we'd rather put them in front of places where they're wanted than they're not. So can they refuse it? No. Can we take into consideration their feelings on it and maybe plant it in front of someone's house who wants it instead? Yes. But is it that's in front of my house, you can't do it? No, that's not. It's just we try to make it as smooth as possible because we don't need any other things that escalate from that either. Like vandalism and stuff.
Yeah, so it's similar for me, because I plant street trees. If I have a resident who I've had people cut trees in half after I plant them in front of their house. Yeah, we don't want that. I'll let people know via letter if I'm planting a tree in front of their house and give my contact, let them respond and all that stuff. I can't really comment because I don't work for the Parks Department, I work for Forestry. So the Wollaston Beach is managed, I think it's part of the Neponset complex. So those people out of the Neponset Yard over in Boston, they're the people who take care of that beach. They're the people who are deciding what is planted on that property. I'm working on getting trees planted in the median on like the northern part of Quincy Shore Drive, which isn't along the beach, but we're trying to do something just because that's in my planting zone. And theoretically, the beach is not eligible for me. I have a bounty out for my laborers and anybody I work with. If they convince a homeowner on Quincy Shore Drive to get a tree planted, they will be handsomely rewarded.
All right, we got it covered.
All right, well, it is a couple minutes past 8:30. As I said, please, email the Quincy Tree Alliance or these guys. The emails are right on there with any questions that didn't get answered. And we just want to thank the library for hosting this.
Thanks.